Assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope all of you are doing good. In this lecture, we are going to talk about the biological species concept. So we will construct a long question in these headings. First of all, we will discuss about the history, then definition. Then we will see at the point that species has three different functions. We will look at those functions. Then we will discuss about six tenets or six principles of biological species concept or six tenets of species. And then we will look into the criticism. So if I talk about history, then biological species concept, it was proposed by K. Jordan. Firstly, it was given by scientist whose name was K. Jordan, and this concept was given around 1750. Okay, it took many years to find its base, and the other scientists who supported these concepts were Buffer, Walsh, and Mayer. But K. Jordan was the first one who formulated this concept. So if we will look into the definition of this concept, definitions such as species are the reproductively isolated and interbreeding natural populations. Okay, so what is the definition? Species is a group of interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from all other such groups in nature. Now we will look at three different functions of species concept. The three different functions. The first of them is that species represent a reproductive community. What does this mean? It means that species seek each other as the potential mate, or they like go to each other for the process of reproduction. Okay, so it is clear the individuals of the species, they seek each other for the purpose of reproduction. They recognize each other as potential mates. Hence, this point says that species represent the intraspecific reproduction. Means within the species, the reproduction is going to take place. That is why it is a reproductive community, and species seek each other as the potential mates. The second point is species represent the ecological unit. Now we know that different species occur in nature, and there is some kind of like relationships between them, such as symbiosis, mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, etc. And the species require some food, some shelter, and habitats. Each of this is represented in the ecology or the environment. So one species interacts with the other species as an ecological unit, and hence different members of the species, it represents the ecological unit. The third function is that species represent a genetic unit. How is it a genetic unit? It is said that suppose species is the gene pool or the pool of genes. This is the gene pool, and one individual, what is that one individual? That one individual is merely a individual that is carrying a temporal vessel or a temporary vessel having some genes in it. Okay, so this is how it is represented at the genetic unit. Means there is a pool of gene, or there is a genetic pool or the gene pool. And what is the gene pool? The whole species, it is a gene pool or the pool of genes. Okay, and what one individual is carrying, the one individual is just like holding a vessel, a temporary vessel or temporal vessel, carrying some kind of genes in it. Next we will look at the point of six tenets of species or the six principles of species. Out of six, three of them we have discussed them already: reproductive community, ecological unit, and genetic unit. Three are these points, and the next three we will discuss them. Okay, so now the fourth point is that species consist of population, not unconnected individuals. Means the populations, they are connected to each other. There is not discontinuity. When we looked into the typological species concept, there was a postulate that species, they represent a sharp discontinuity, but in the biological species concept we are denying that postulate. We are saying that species consist of population, and those populations, they are connected. Okay, they are like, they are connected. There is no any kind of discontinuity or no connection between them. Okay, there is continuity, and they are not unconnected individuals. It means they are connected individuals. There is kind of connections between them. Fifth point is that species are defined by reproductive isolation of population. What does this mean? That the population, it is reproductively isolated from all other populations. Means suppose this is a population of monkey and this is a population of dog, and then we have a population of cats. So all of these populations, they are isolated from each other. Why? Because monkeys, they are going to interbreed among themselves, dogs will interbreed among themselves, cats will breed among themselves, they will not breed or mate with the other species. Hence they are reproductively isolated. Only the reproduction takes place in their own populations, not with the other populations. All right, so the sixth point is species are not defined by fertility of individuals. When we talk about reproduction, or when we said that species represent a reproductive community, we are saying that species, they will seek each other as potential mates, they will mate and they will interbreed, and then they will produce their offsprings, they will produce the next generations. All right, but obviously we know that for the reproduction or for the mating, we need two parents, male and female. Okay, male and female, so both of them, they have to mate and then the next generation is produced. Okay, so for this process, the female, it has to be fertile. Okay, when the female is fertile, it can reproduce, the generations are produced. So now there are some females in the population which are not fertile, so that is not denying the definition of biological species concept. The biological species concept says that the species or their reproductive community, or their reproduction and their definition, it is not defined by the fertility of a single individual. Means even if there is any infertile female, one, two, three, or many females that can be infertile, then it is not denying the concept of species, that is still included in the species. Okay, so species are not defined by the fertility of the single individual. So means the whole population, it can reproduce, it can fertile, it can produce next generation, so it is included in the species, and it is the species concept. This is not eradicated or denied by the fertility or the infertility of a single female or the single individual. Now we will look into the criticism. We have discussed all of these points. Now we will see criticism. Here are the concepts. We will look into the criticism. So first of all, if biological species concept is criticized, it does not mean that this concept is wrong one and we cannot consider this concept. Even there are the criticized points, even there are the difficulties in the application, it is still considered one of the most unique and most important species concept. Okay, so it was criticized in these ways. First of all, we will look at the heading of the insufficient information, and in the insufficient information we have two concepts about the fossil record. We have the we lack the information about the fossils, and then we will look at the variation concept. Then we have the second heading of uniparental reproduction. In these concepts we will look into the asexual groups and the alternation of generation, and we will further discuss the evolutionary intermediacy. So first of all, if I talk about insufficient information, so there are many organisms or many fossils about which we do not have much information. So this concept, it was criticized by evolutionists and neontologists. If we talk about who are the neontologists, then we already know the paleontologists. The paleontologists are those scientists which study the fossils or the extinct species. So neontologists are those scientists which study the living organisms or the species that are existing right now at the present moment in the nature. This concept, it was criticized by evolutionists and neontologists in the way that we cannot recognize species on the basis of fossil record. We only have the fossils of those species. We have the remains of the species that were present at that moment. We do not have the species at present moment in front of us. All right, so the preserved specimens or the fossils, they do not verify the interbreeding character, do not verify if they were interbreeding or if they were the species at that time. Do not verify interbreeding character. How can we tell by looking at the fossil that if it was interbreeding with the members of its species or not? We cannot tell by looking at the fossil. All right, so Hence, fossils are identified morphologically and not biologically, and we are obviously looking the definition by biological species concept. So, in this way, this concept was criticized, and the next one was the variation. We have already discussed about the variation in many species, just like the phenone, the male phena and the female phena. We have discussed about these points, and then we see the different larval stages or the different age stages, and the sexual dimorphism, larva, pupa, adult, and sexual dimorphism, and many other kind of variations. So how is this variation concept being criticized? That there are the different age stages in a species or in a population, so we cannot give them the name of the separate species. Suppose it is a larva of a silkworm, then we cannot call larva as a separate species, we cannot call pupa as separate species, we cannot call the female phena as separate species and the male phena as a separate species. So this variation is creating much doubt, as we cannot create this much species in the classification. So this variation, it is creating doubt, it is raising doubt whether a certain morphotype, whether a certain phenotype, it is a separate species or whether it is the same species. We cannot identify. Okay, that is why this concept was criticized. Now we will look at the uniparental reproduction. Now we know that reproduction is of two types: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So in asexual reproduction, only one parent is involved, and hence the uniparental reproduction represents this point, that only one parent is involved. And in the uniparental reproduction, we will look at concepts such as self-fertilizing hermaphroditism. You already know the concept of hermaphrodite. It means that both male and female organs, they are present in a single individual. And we will look at the automixes. Automixes is same as that of the autogamy, means a new individual, it is deriving from a single meiotically dividing cell. All right, so it means that only one parent, it is giving rise to the next generation. So in asexual reproduction, we see that there are many species, many groups which are reproducing apomictically or asexually, apomictic or asexual. Okay, so these are not fulfilling the concept of species. In the biological species concept, we saw the definition that species are the groups of interbreeding population. They breed among themselves and they are reproductively isolated. So this criteria, it is not fulfilled in this definition. What about those which are asexually reproducing? What about those that are apomictic? All right, where do we place these groups? Where do we place the species that are reproducing asexually? We cannot place them in the biological species concept as it is not fulfilling the criteria. Next, we have the alternation of generation, this heading. In the alternation of generation, we see that there are some species that are asexual in one part of their life and sexual in the other part of their life. Hence, again, it is not fulfilling the biological species concept. So we have the problem in classifying these species. The examples of the species that shows the alternation of generation, these are the gall wasps, Daphnia, and aphids. These show the alternation of generation, means they are sexual in one part of their life and parthenogenetic in the other, or the asexual in the other part of their life. Next, we will look into the concept of evolutionary intermediacy, as the concept is indicating that evolutionary means evolution is taking place, new species are being formed. All right, and intermediacy means in between. Okay, somewhere in between of evolution. The literal meaning of this concept is that somewhere in between the evolution. So you see, when the species are evolving. Okay, so first of all, before looking into the concept of evolutionary intermediacy, it is important for the taxonomists to go deep into the stage of the differentiation, to all stages of differentiation of the species, taxonomists. Okay, to get the knowledge or to have the thorough knowledge of all the stages of differentiation between the individual variant and their species. Means a species, if it is evolving, suppose it's a species A, it is evolving into species B. So in this process, it has to undergo many variants. Suppose this, there are some variants which it has to go through, and then it will be evolved into this new species. So it is important for the taxonomist to get the knowledge of the distinct species and their variants, so that they can classify them properly, so that there would be no problem in the classification. So many species, they have to pass through this variant steps, and these intermediate stages, some of them are known as the biotypes. These intermediate stages are also known as the races, and these are also known as the semi-species. So in these incipient speciation means the species which are forming. In these incipient speciation, the populations will be found which are in the process of becoming separate species. This was the first population, it is becoming into a second population or the second species. And they have the attributes, these are the variants. They have the attributes, some attributes and some qualities and some characteristics of this species, and some characteristics, some qualities of this species. That's why they are the semi-species or the variants or the evolutionary intermediate stages. So the difficulties in this step, we will look into the four difficulties of this concept. The first one is the acquisition of reproductive isolation without equivalent morphological change. If we look into the literal meaning of this heading, we will see that there is the reproductive isolations, mean the species they are isolated from each other, they are not interbreeding with each other, they have the isolation. Okay, they do not reproduce with each other, but there is not any morphological change, means they are morphologically similar without equivalent morphological change. Without morphology means the morphology is same, without morphological change means the morphology is the same. So the first point is reproductively isolated and morphologically similar. Morphology similar. Now if we look at the previous videos in which we discussed about the concept of phenone, we talked about the sibling species. So this heading, it is talking about the sibling species. As we already know that when we studied about the sibling species, we said that sibling species, they are reproductively isolated, means they do not reproduce among themselves, among each other, but they have the same morphology. That is why they are called as sibling. Okay, their morphology is similar but they are reproductively isolated. So it is difficult to identify the sibling species which have the reproductive isolation but they are morphologically similar. So there is the problem in classifying the sibling species, where to put these species. So the next heading is acquisition of strong morphological differences. Now there are the morphological differences. Previously we saw that morphology was similar, now the morphology is different without reproductive isolation, means there is no reproductive isolation, means the two different species, they can breed among each other, but they have the morphological differences. The morphology is different. No reproductive isolation, but different morphology. So there are the number of genera of the plants and animals which are known under this heading, means they can reproduce with each other but they are morphologically different. And here comes the example of snail genus. Genus is Cerion, Cerion, Cerion. West Indian snail genus Cerion. The example in this concept is of the snail genus Cerion. This snail genus and the other snails, they have different morphology, but whenever they get a chance to breed with, they interbreed with each other. So it is undoubtedly inappropriate to call every morphologically distinct population as species. The third heading is about the hybridization or the hybrid complexes. We know that species are those populations that are reproductively isolated, okay, no reproduction among themselves. So in the hybridization, there is the breakdown of isolating mechanism. We were talking about the reproductive isolation. means species are reproductively isolated, but in hybridization means this isolation, it is breaking down, means two different species, they are interacting and breeding with each other, and they will form the new generation, which is known as the hybrid, okay, or the hybrid complex. So in the hybridization we will look into two types, sympatric hybridization and amphiploidy. Reproductive isolation, it break down even between the good species. Suppose there is a species of horse and there is a species of donkey. Now both of them, they are the good parents and they try to maintain the reproductive isolation. But even if they uh, mate and the hybrid is formed, which we know as the mule, then this hybrid, there is difficulty in the classification of the hybrids or the hybrid complexes, and hybrids do not fulfill the biological species concept criteria or their definition. All right, there is difficulty in the nomenclature and difficulty in the classification of the hybrids. So taxonomic difficulties are seen due to the hybridization. And suppose scientists are classifying different animals, they classify the horses, donkey, and then the mule. So they suppose identify the hybrids as a different species and identify the horse as different species and donkey different species. But after some time, if it is like known that this hybrid, it was not a different species but it was the like product of horse and donkey, it makes the difficulty in the application of the biological species concept, and such names and the such classifications, they lose their validity. So we say that only populations are recognized as taxa, and hybrids are not the populations. Hybrids are totally different from the populations. Those are the hybrids, those are not the populations. Okay, so in the two types of hybridization, we will look at the sympatric hybridization. Now the species, they try to maintain their genetic integrity over a wide area, all right, in which they occur. They try to remain species, means if this is a horse and this is a donkey, it try to remains and it try to maintain a isolation, okay, and maintain the genetic integrity. However, even if this isolation is broken down, if they get a chance, then they will mate and the hybrid is reproduced. Hence this is known as the sympatric hybridization, and hence no taxonomic recognition is given to such hybrids, is given to the hybrid populations that are resulted from such breakdown of the reproductive isolation. Next, we will talk about the second process of hybridization, which is known as the amphiploidy. So amphiploidy, it mostly occurs in the plants. Amphiploidy means that two sets of, or the two diploid sets from each of the parent, it combines in the offspring. Suppose this is a female and this is a male. Female has the genes AA and male has the genes BB. So in the offspring, both of the sets, they are combined, AA and BB. Okay, means two sets of chromosomes are present in from each parent. Okay, one complete set which is formed from the parents. Okay, so this is the amphiploidy and it occurs mostly in the plants. And amphiploidy, it leads to the allopolyploidy. Allopolyploidy means that two or more sets or two or more chromosomes, two or more sets, two or more diploid sets, they are combined in the offspring or the next generation, and it is known as the allopolyploidy. And these sets, they can be from the same species or the different species. In amphiploidy, it was from the same species, okay, and in allopolyploidy, it can be from the same species or the different species. So amphiploidy leads to the instantaneous production of polyploidy. Okay, now these offsprings, these hybrids, they are totally different from all other species, from their parents and from their ancestors and everyone in the world. All right, these are the uniquely different species. It behaves like a new species. First of all, there are very less chances of them to survive, but even if they survive, then if they are able to survive and they are able to reproduce, then they occupy a new ecological niche in the environment, new ecological niche, and then they have the ability to compete with all other such species in the nature. And the next heading, like we have discussed about first, second, third, now we have the fourth heading in the evolutionary intermediacy concept. The fourth heading is about the semi-species. As the name indicate, like we know about a circle or the semicircle. Circle and the semicircle means half circle. So species mean the species, and semi-species means somewhere in the formation of species, means the half species. They're not completely the species. So in the semi-species concept, we will see that we know about species, and in the next videos we will look deeply into the concept of the subspecies. Subspecies is the like intraspecific category that lies below the species level. So somewhere between species that are forming into the subspecies, there is the stage of the semi-species, as we are looking into the evolutionary intermediacy stage. So semi-species is the intermediate stage. So semi-species, according to some taxonomists and some scientists, they are considered as the species, and according to some, they are not. So it is very difficult to place them in any like taxonomic category or to classify them, or it arises the difficulty in their origin. All right. So that is why this concept was criticized by the scientists, that where to put the semi-species. They are not fulfilling the biological species concept. So where to put them? Suppose this is a species and this is another species, and there is some kind of like we have some space here, and they are geographically isolated, but some species, suppose if they combine together, so in these area semi-species are found. Okay, means they are geographically isolated, but occasionally they have intermediates. So this intermediate area, this is known as the semi-species, okay, which is between the subspecies and species. So it was all about the biological species concept and the difficulties in its applications. If you have any question and any problem regarding this concept, you can ask in the comment section.